So there has been a certain item that has always been popular year after year. It always ends up in the bestseller column. They're super easy to make, the designs are pretty much endless, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make 3 different styles of these for right around $5 each. So are you wondering what that mystery item is? It's ladders. I have been building and selling items since I was a kid, and ladders are just something that's always been popular. You can use them inside as towel racks, quilt racks, or outside as decoration. These things look great in pretty much any type of setting. So are you ready to build some ladders? Let's get to it. So to build each different style of these ladders, I'm going to be using 2x6 material. Yes, you can use 2x4s, but it'll end up costing you more in the long run. Right now in my area, 2x6s are $5.18 a piece. That's not bad at all. I think that we can make most of these versions out of one 2x6. Now I've seen a lot of different styles of ladder that's actually made out of 2x4s. And most of the time it's individuals making these things to sell, and they're really not having a whole lot of luck. Well, the reason why I think that they're having issues selling these things is because it looks like it's made out of 2x4s. Well, it has the rounded edges and all that, and this doesn't look old. So if something's meant to be decorative and it's obvious that it came from a 2x4, well, maybe you need to put just a little bit more work into it to solve that issue. And that's why I'm using a 2x6, and we'll be ripping down all of our parts on the table saw. Let's get started. Since 6 foot is the most popular length for these ladders, that's what we'll be making in each style. So before I rip my material down, I'm going to start off by cutting my boards down to 6 foot lengths. Now keep in mind, you'll only need 1 board for each ladder style. I'm just cutting these all at once to save a little time. Now as always, I'm going to show you step by step on how to make each one of these designs. But if you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website. I'll throw a link in the description for plans for all 3 ladders. So now that my 2x6 is cut down to a 6 foot board and a 2 foot board, I'm going to go ahead and take the 6 foot material, rip off my curved outside edge, and then I'll rip this down to 2.5 inches wide. We'll be using these for our legs, and we'll be able to get 2 out of each one of these boards. So now that we have our leg material to 2.5 inches wide, let's go ahead and thin this board down to 1 inch by running it on its edge. And just to be on the safe side, I'm going to run it through once, flip the board over, and then run it through again to complete my cut. And then for our 2 foot board, I'm going to start off by removing the outside edge and then cutting these down into 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch boards. Now with that cut made, I have 1 inch by 2.5 inch boards. We'll be using these for ladder rungs. Okay, so now that we have our material cut down, let's go ahead and get everything ready for our first style of ladder. So basically for each one of these different styles, I have the exact same amount of parts. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is start to distress this material. So if you think about it, most of these ladders that you see, they look old. Now there may be a mix of paint and stain, things like that, but for the most part, they're all made to look vintage. And if you find a wooden ladder somewhere, well, it's going to be vintage and it's going to look vintage. So that's what we're trying to replicate. So how do we get this new looking pine to look old? Well, there's several different ways to do that. I'll show you one way to do it, and that's using a hatchet. So as you all know, hatchets are sharp, so don't hurt yourself. But essentially that's all that I'm going to do to this material is knock the sharp edges off, throw in some hatchet cuts and dents. Then whenever we go to stain this, all of the marks that we're putting in this material will show up as a darker contrast to the rest of the wood. Now again, there's several different ways that you can do this. This is just a super quick and easy way. So I know what you're thinking. Okay, so you just cut this material and now you're beating it all up. Well, absolutely. And there's different levels of distressing. This first one I'm doing pretty heavy. But to get the different looks, that's all you would have to do is add a little less distressing or a little bit more. Just think of an old ladder being used in a barn somewhere for 200 years. It's going to get pretty beat up. So now that I've put in my hatchet cuts, now it's time for a very important step. Is to sand this material down. This is going to make all of these dents and divots super smooth, like it's been handled and it's worn. And what we're doing now is what actually will make these things sell. The more time that you spend making these things look authentic, easier these things are going to be to move. Now that I have my material distressed, I'm going to go ahead and stain it. And for each one of these different ladders, I'm going to use a different stain. All of these different stains will have a darker, kind of a rich amber color. But each one's going to have a little different look. I found that these colors are perfect for distressing. Even though they're similar, whenever we're done, they'll have a completely different look. Now I'm not going to show me staining each different set of this material. And if you're curious on what I'm using to apply this stain, it's a stain pad by Makers. And you've seen these in a lot of my videos. They just make everything go a whole lot quicker. And we're going to be cutting our rung material to size. So make sure to keep a little stain handy for touch-ups. Okay, so now that we have all of our paint stained up, painted up, however that you want to do it, everything's going to start going together really quickly now. Essentially, the hard part's done. So for this first one, we're just going to do a basic straight leg design. Let's say that we want this ladder to actually sit at an angle off of a wall. Keep these feet from sliding out on us, let's go ahead and add a 15-degree angle to the bottom of each leg. Okay, so now that we have our angles put onto our legs, whenever we rest this against the wall, it'll sit at a nice 15-degree angle. Now the only thing left to do is to install our crossbars. So since this version is just a straight ladder, the only thing that we'll need to do is to cut our 3 boards down to 12-inch lengths. Alright, so now that we have our rungs cut for this ladder, let's go ahead and mark out our legs. So I want 5 different ladder rungs on this ladder with about a foot in between each one. So since these legs are 6 foot long, let's go ahead and mark out 1 foot through 5 foot on our legs. So now that we have our 1 foot sections marked out onto the front of our legs, let's go ahead and pre-drill some holes for our screws. So now I'm going to mark our 1 through 5 foot again, and then transfer that mark to the center of our leg board. And then we'll just repeat this for our second side. Now that I have my boards marked, I'm going to be using a 3/8 counterbore bit. Now counterboring your screws will be completely up to you. I just think that it adds a nice touch. Right, so now that we have our counterbores on both of our legs, let's go ahead and install these rungs. And for this, I'm going to be using 2 1/4 inch trim screws and wood glue. So this is where those reference marks on the edges are going to come into play. I'm going to set my rungs on a 1/2 inch piece of scrap material. That's going to bring each one to center. And then I'll use the marks that we made earlier as a center guide. Once I have these lined up, I'll install the rungs using wood glue and 2 1/4 inch trim screws. I'm just putting 1 screw in each end. You could put 2 if you would like, but since we are not actually going to be climbing around on these things, this is for decoration. Once this wood glue dries, it's going to be plenty strong enough. Okay, so we have our first kind of standard shaped ladder done, and turned out pretty dang awesome. So with our angles on the bottom, this thing's going to sit nicely against the wall. Then for the tops, if you'd like, you can add a little angle to this, round off this edge, or just add a little felt pad. So now that you see just how easy it is to knock this out, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, so for this next one, we're going to be using the same material that we did for the first one, except this time we're going to make more of like a A-frame type of a ladder. Really the only difference between this one and our first one is we're going to be cutting our rungs at different lengths and adding an angle to each end. Let's go and get those cut. So for this style of a ladder, I'm going to put a 4-degree angle on each end of my rungs. Then I'll simply take my first board and cut it to 14 inches. That's going to leave me with a 10-inch offcut. So let's go ahead and use that and add the angle to the opposite end. Then for my second board, I'm going to cut it at 13 inches. That'll leave me with an 11-inch offcut. We'll be using that also. And then for our last board, I'm going to measure this out to 12 inches and put the angle on both sides. Okay, so now that we have all of our rungs cut at our angles, we can start putting this together. So before we start attaching, we're going to do the exact same thing that we did in the first one. I'm going to go ahead and mark out every foot. And then I'll pre-drill the outsides of our legs. And putting the 15-degree angle on the ends of these boards, it's completely up to you. It depends on what you're going to be using them for. But I'm going to go ahead and throw them on. So now that we have everything pre-drilled and ready to go, we'll assemble this thing just like we did for the previous one. I'm going to start by attaching all of my rungs on one side, then we'll flip this around, install it on the second, then we're done. All right, so we have ladder number 2 complete. Check it out. Looks good. All right, so that looks like an old ladder that comes out of a barn. Pretty sweet for $5 in material. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so for this next one, we're going to shake it up a little bit. As you can see, I've already stained and I've painted the bottom of these legs. Keep in mind that any of the ones that we've already done, you can easily paint the legs up just to add a bit of character. And at the end of the video, I'll make sure to show you all kinds of different styles that I came up with. But for this one, we're going to shake it up a little bit. So check this ladder out. They want $229 for these 6-foot ladders. And honestly, I think that the only reason why they're able to ask this price and actually get it is because how the rungs go through the side of the ladder. It makes these things unique and super marketable. So let's come up with our own version of that without using any type of fancy tools. So to start with, I have all of my rungs cut down to size just like the previous ones. The only difference is a couple of mine have already been painted. So for this version, we're going to thin our rungs down a bit. And we'll just simply do this by splitting them in half. So instead of 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, I want 3/4 by 1.5 inches material. Then once we have those split, we'll head over to the miter saw and cut these down to 17 inches, 16, 15, 14, and 13. Now the reason why we want these a little bit longer is because they will actually be going through the legs. By cutting them this length, it's still going to give us the same width between our legs. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so now that we have all of our rungs cut down to 3/4 of an inch thick, and we have our 4-degree angles on each end, let's go ahead and get these marked up to remove some material. So since each one of our legs are 1 inch thick, and I'm wanting to leave about 1/2 inch of material sticking out, so we need to mark 1.5 inches in on each side of our rungs, where the widest part of my 4-degree angle is all going the same direction. That's where I want to put my 1.5 inch mark. And I'm just going to do this for each rung on both sides. You'll see why this is important here in a minute. Once we get those marked, let's head to the miter saw. So with our miter saw still set at 4 degrees, we're going to make a tenon on each side of these rungs. And we're going to do that using the saw's depth stop. But to set the depth stop, I'm just going to start off by marking my board 1/4 inch down. Then I'm going to lower my depth stop. And if you're not for sure if your saw has one, go check it out. Most saws have one from the factory. Now again, there's several different ways that you can do this. You can actually do every bit of this on a table saw if you have a table saw sled. Or you could even do it with a circular saw. It's completely up to you. Then we'll just adjust our depth until it hits the 1/4 inch mark. Now with that set, let's take off some material. So we're going to be removing material from both sides of each end. Just make sure that you're following the angle of your ends. So this is what it should look like. Now we'll just repeat this for all of our rungs, then we're ready to start with our legs. Okay, so now that we have our tenons installed on each one of our ends, let's go ahead and get our mortises made into our legs. And we're not going to be using a mortising tool or anything like that. We're just going to be using a drill and a jigsaw. Let's get these laid out. So to lay out these legs, we're going to be marking the insides of the boards. We'll make sure that our legs are even, and we're going to measure up 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, and 5 foot like we did for the others, and make a mark in the center. Now with those marked, I'm just going to use one of my tenons as a template. I'm going to make sure that the tip of the angle is facing up, then I'll align the bottom of the tenon with my mark. Then that's all that I have to do is trace around the end. Then we have a cutting template on our board. Then we'll just repeat this for each one of our marks. Now with our mortises marked out onto our board, we're going to take 1/2 inch drill bit and drill a hole on each side of each one of our markings. And now with that drilled out, we're just going to take a jigsaw and connect the outside edges of our drill holes. And if you wanted to square up the arches from the drill bit, the jigsaw is a perfect tool to do that. So now that we have our mortises and our ladder legs, let's go ahead and attach our rungs. And once I have all of my rungs installed, then I'm just going to use a couple of clamps to hold everything in place while I install my dowels. So we're actually going to be using these little dowels or plugs to add a bit of decoration to the ends of these rungs and to help hold everything into place. I'm going to install these by drilling a 3/8 inch hole on the end of each one of my rungs. This is what I'm talking about. Now these dowels really set everything off. Okay, so this is my favorite one so far. That's pretty cool. These dowels just really set everything off. I just need to touch up some of my stains, some of my paint, but I really like this one. All right, so I've shown you how to build 3 different styles of ladders, and you can take that information and build about any type of ladder that you want. So now that you've seen just how easy that it is to build these, let's take a look at some of the other ones that I've made. All right, so here are some of the different styles that I've made. You saw the first ones as I was making them. So this one's just an 8-foot ladder where I slammed everything down in the middle, then went straight back out to our normal size. So if you're making these to sell, definitely make some of these. And this is how the last one ended up. Looks good. And this is another 8-foot ladder that I made. I painted the bottoms black and added gray to the tips. This is another one that I really like the look on. and the other two you've seen. So if you've ever thought about making these ladders for yourself or to sell, well, I just showed you how to make each one of these designs for right around $5. So there's no excuse. So you know what your next step is to get up, get out, and get your build on. Till next time, we'll see ya. Imagine taking a pile of wood and turning it into something amazing. Now, imagine doing that without years of frustration. You do not need a fancy workshop, expensive tools, or years of experience. With Woodworking Kickstart, you'll build confidence and real skills in no time. So you can spend years making mistakes and learning the hard way like I did, or you can start building with confidence today. So join me in Woodworking Kickstart and let's get your journey started.